Hi folks, this is Ohto. In this video I am trying out a sketch of this contrasty, shadowy street scene using a fast and loose ink and watercolour technique, and I'm doing the whole sketch in real time, so if you want to join in and have a go at sketching this yourself you can do so. The link is in the description, and I think this one is very achievable even for beginners. So for the first minute or so I do a very rough scribbly pencil sketch, and I've darkened the picture slightly so you can see the pencil better, and I'm just keeping it very rough and scribbly. It's just marking out the outline of the buildings, ready to go on to the paint stage. I'm going to be putting the paint down first on this one and then drawing over the top of it, so this is really just to give me an idea of where I'm going to put the paint. I'm really starting to get into exploring watercolour. I think the whole thing is fascinating. When I started out sketching I found it incredibly frustrating. I couldn't get the results that I wanted. I was getting cheesed off by the randomness and unpredictability of it, but I think once you understand how paint works on the page, then you can start to enjoy it, and that's really something that I want to do now and explore and see where it takes me. In my previous video I tried out a technique where I was putting the watercolour down first and then drawing over the top of it, and I really enjoyed doing that, so I thought I'm going to give this another go. And this time I'm not using a wet and wet technique, I'm just doing lots of wet paint straight onto dry paper, but the paper will end up quite saturated with lots of paint. So I'm mixing up a very wet yellow ochre and that goes straight on, and I'm really just sploshing this anywhere where there will be an ochre coloured building. It really doesn't have to look neat and tidy. This is brilliant for beginners because you can just splosh the paint on pretty much anywhere you like, creating rough shapes. It does already look a complete mess, and trust me, it is going to get an awful lot worse, but just persist with it. I did reach a point where I thought, oh, I've messed this one up, but I kept going and it all turned out fine in the end. So on the right hand side building I'm adding a bit more paint straight from the palette to get that side darker. Then I'm going to try and lighten the smaller building in the distance at the far end of the alleyway to make that one lighter. That creates a little bit of atmospheric perspective where things in the foreground are darker than things in the background. So I'll do that in a second once I've darkened down the buildings in the foreground, and already you can see it is taking the shape of the street. Now I added more water to that building in the distance, and then I tried a sweeping technique to try and brush some of the excess paint off that building to get it a little bit lighter, and then swooshed it across. I don't know if this is a proven technique. Proper watercolour artists are probably going to be frowning and shaking their heads at this point, but it worked for me, so that's an official technique now. The paints I'm using for this one are my usual Royal Talens Van Gogh watercolours. This is quite a big set that comes in metal tins. I can't seem to find these ones anymore, but you can get them in smaller plastic trays, and the smaller ones are probably better for urban sketching anyway because they're more portable, easier to take out and about. And I never use half of the colours anyway, so most of them are fairly unnecessary. I've finished with the first colour wash now, so I'm going to move on to the shadows. And I decided to go with a Payne's grey for the shadows. I could have also used indigo or black, but I think the Payne's grey has got a nice bluish tint to the darkness and creates a nice shadow with a bit of colour tone in it. This is really all a big experiment for me. I'm not a trained watercolour artist, as you can probably tell. I'm using the most basic flat watercolour brush that came from a beginner's art set. If you are a beginner, you don't need to spend a lot of money to get good results. The cheapest materials will get you started, get you into the way of it. I think a decent set of paints will make a difference in terms of reducing the level of frustration, because good paint will be much more highly pigmented, much more vibrant colours in it, and it will just look better. It will give you a better result. And I deliberately went in with the shadowy paint before the yellow ochre was dry, because I love the bleeding effect, and you can see that as the ochre creeps into the shadows. And most of that won't be visible at the end of the sketch, but I just love seeing it. You get all this spiky, trickly effects when one wet paint goes into the other. Now I'm just sloshing the Payne's grey paint over the top of the yellow ochre to create the first layer of shadows. Now don't worry when you see this is looking really messy and a bit of a shambles. I did think that myself as I was getting to this stage, but I had a plan in mind. I trusted myself, so I just kept going. And it does work out, even though it looks a bit odd at the moment. As you'll see shortly, not all of this paint is going to survive. I'm going to strip some of it away. Now my plan was to capture some of the rough texture in the walls, so I decided to strip off some of the paint that I'd put down with a paper towel. Now don't worry, this does look really dodgy, but I think it's quite an effective way to create texture. I will be putting more paint down over the top of it, but for now, once all the paint is dry, I move on to the drawing stage. I am using an Ohto graphic liner for this one. My previous sketch was the first time using this pen, and I really liked it. I thought the ink flows out of it quite well, and I decided to use a more scribbly, loose, scratchy drawing style. I thought it would suit the scene, and there is something about drawing over the top of paint instead of painting over the top of the drawing that really appeals to me. It's much more loose and freeing. I find it's quite liberating to not have to think about trying to get every angle and line correct, and if you make a mistake you're not even going to notice because all the lines are scratchy and there's lines doubling over each other and wobbly lines and scribbles everywhere. Drawing like this is what I would liken to writing your signature. You don't really think about writing your signature, you just scribble it down, and that's the way that I'm drawing here. I'm holding my pen right at the end, so it's not like how you would hold it if you were writing, and that's actually something I should point out that was mentioned in the comments of one of my videos recently. Someone finally brought up my very odd pen holding technique, and I was wondering how long it was going to take for someone to bring this up, but I do hold my pen in a very strange way. Even if I hold it further down, then this is the way I hold my pen, and it's something I've been doing for as long as I've been holding pens, since I was a kid. The teachers at school tried to get me to change and hold my pen in the so-called proper way, the same as every other kid, but this is always just the way that has felt natural to me, and it's very strange. I don't know why I do it, and the reasoning that the teachers gave for trying to change my pen holding technique was that this is the wrong way to do it. But my argument was, well, if my work is good and my writing is neat, then what exactly is the problem? And so I think eventually they just gave up. And you can already see the buildings starting to emerge, and you've got the rough textures coming through. It was just something that occurred to me I could try, and it could have gone one of two ways. It could have been effective, or it could have been a complete mess. But you'll see once I go back in with the next layer of paint, it will add even more depth as I create the deep shadows. This is the direction I want to go and explore with my sketching. If you've watched my other videos in the past, you will have seen me do a lot of the cartoony sketches that take hours to complete, and they require a lot of concentration and they're quite difficult, and it's really quite refreshing to be able to just sketch something in the space of 20-30 minutes that is a complete scene. And this is not something that I could have done with marker pens at all. It just wouldn't remotely work. This is something that I could really only have achieved in watercolour, and the loose drawing style like this I just find it so enjoyable, and I want to explore it. And because it's much faster, it allows me to do more real-time sketches. And I have been listening to the feedback that you've been giving me over the last wee while, and something that's come up several times is because I've been doing time-lapse videos most of the time, people have been saying that the bits where I've been slowing down the sketch to show you in real time, you found that useful. So I thought, why not just do more sketches in real time, and this allows me to do that, because then if you want to, you can sketch along. Hopefully going to encourage more people to have a go at getting into watercolour if they're new to it, or exploring new techniques if you're just looking for ideas and inspiration. So I'm finished with the drawing section for now. I will come back and do a little bit more drawing, but now I'm going back in with the paint, and this is the PAYNE'S grey again, and just adding more layers of shadow. The ideal thing about using a flat brush is you can get really nice crisp lines where you want to, and then some of these shadow lines are quite sharp, so a flat brush allows you to achieve that. And you can really afford to be quite bold and dark with the shadows. That creates all the contrast. Watercolour will always dry lighter once it's dry, so you can really go darker than you would think you should go. And even in this one, I don't think I went dark enough. Once it was dry, it had lightened a fair amount, so don't be afraid to darken it up. And I did get a nice boost this week because I was reunited with my sister for the first time in 2.5 years. She moved across to America just before the pandemic happened, and this is the first time she's been able to come back since then. So that's been a really nice boost. And the other good thing, if not the better thing, is that she is a musician and she has a really good microphone, which I have been able to borrow / steal from her. So hopefully in the weeks to come, once I've got it all set up, I'll be able to start using a much better microphone, and that will help improve the audio and take that to the next level, because there have been quite a number of comments about how quiet some of the videos have been. I do take on board the feedback that you give me, so I will strive to hopefully make the audio much better with the new microphone in the videos going forward. I decided to avoid painting in the shadows on the top right section of the building. On the right, I just thought there would be a little bit too much darkness. I wanted to give a little bit of contrast between the light and the dark, so I just left that section light as though the sun was hitting it. You don't always have to stick exactly to what you're seeing in a scene, and I love that I can just be loose and expressive, and it's really quite a freeing way to draw and paint. Once the shadows are dry, I can go back in with another few scribbles just to emphasise some of the lines, bolden them up a bit, and once again it's more scratchy lines. This isn't entirely necessary, it's just something that I decided to do, partly because I always like to fiddle. I never know when to stop, I just keep scribbling and scratching away. So you can be very expressive and loose, and I'm just going around some of the windows and the doors, just re-emphasising and making the drawing deliberately more messy and scribbly. And that's the beauty of this technique, is that there's really no need to be remotely perfectionist about this. This is just wild and free. It's totally instinctive, and for something so messy and potentially disastrous looking earlier on, I really quite like the way it turned out. And it definitely gives me the confidence to keep experimenting and trying new techniques and ideas in watercolour, because it's almost unlimited where you can go and what you can do with it. And if you'd like to see more urban sketching inspiration like this, you can click on this video right here, and I will see you in the next one.